Hi, welcome back to Kingdom Portions here in Kingdom in Context. This week we're looking at Leviticus 14 and 15 and continuing our part 2 in our series and discussion about the leprosy, how it pertains to the Kingdom of God, all the instructions for it that we're reading about in Leviticus, how that will apply to us in the future at the resurrection. We're even going to be looking at a fascinating passage in 2 Chronicles where the Israelites did not keep the cleanliness laws perfectly and they tried to keep Passover. How does it pertain to this lesson? Stick with us. Hi, welcome back to Kingdom in Context. I'm Sean Griffin, and I'm accompanied by my incredible co-host and wife.
Hey guys, I'm Lindsay. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, sweetie.
Shabbat Shalom, babe.
Folks, thank you for joining us again this week. This is a unique study that we're doing in Leviticus 14 and 15, and it's following up to what we talked about last week about lepers in the kingdom, how leprosy would relate to the kingdom of God in the future, as far as why there's so much attention possibly paid to it in these chapters in Leviticus, with all the procedural inspections as far as how to spot it, how to know what it is, all the different. This week we're going to be reading about how they actually cleanse the lepers, right? But the cleansing part is not the healing part,
right?
Which is fascinating. So the cleansing only happens after you've been healed. We'll kind of dissect that and break that down, what that means, and we'll also look at some different examples of this overall concept, this conclusion that we've come to in our study of this idea, and why we think the Father spends so much time on it in His Word, in the Torah itself, with the instructions that were given to the Israelites through Moses at Mount Sinai, because not only is it going to relate to us as a royal priesthood, but it also relates to the heart, which has an outward correlation with this whole concept of cleanliness, just how you become clean, what is the idea of not just with sin and atonement, but also physically, as far as your behavior or hygiene, even as stuff as far as what you eat and what you should not eat. Right. And so it's a very fascinating idea of what this means in relation to our mortal, fallen, corrupted nature now, compared to us trying to interact with a perfect, incorruptible nature of our Heavenly Father. And it's just, to me, it's beautiful, right? We get all this fun. It seems boring at first, but when you really understand a bird's eye view of the picture of what's really being described here, to me, it's fun.
Right.
It really is. This particular episode, though, we want to just give a general disclaimer, like you may have seen at the beginning of the video. This is just a general warning that these topics will cover mature content. And so this is part of the Torah portion, and some of the topics we'll be discussing. If you do not want, your little ones to be listening, you might want to, maybe take them out of the room, I guess.
Yeah, if you're not ready for that talk yet.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure anyone who's read the portion already this week knows why we would give the disclaimer, because there's some adult themes in chapter 15 that deal with some forms of uncleanliness that would, maybe not be appropriate for the little ones. So.
Yeah, so take caution. We appreciate you. Also, we want to remind everybody that there's a Facebook group that we've created. It's called Kingdom in Context / Hanging on His Words. And this idea was for more fellowship, basically, because we have a lot of folks that try to contact us through YouTube, commenting on the videos, and the way the YouTube algorithm works, the way the program itself, the app, it doesn't always let me know if comments are happening on all the videos. And that's been frustrating, because I try to respond to as many as I can as I have time, but I just don't always get notification when people are actually making comments. So for whatever reason, the Facebook algorithm, the Facebook app does much better with that for notifications. So we've created this group that you're welcome to go and join this group. It's a closed group, and it's simply just 3 questions you'd ask, just as a general statement of understanding of why you're there, what we're doing there in the group, because it's considered like a study and fellowship group, right? So we just want to ask 3 basic questions for everyone's accountability as far as interacting with other people in the group. And we hope that if you like the content on this video, and also from the channel Hanging on His Words, which is our brother Ken Heiderbrecht and his videos, if you like the content being discussed from scriptures in these 2 channels, that group is a great place where you can go and fellowship with other people who are talking about the videos and the content that's being brought up in those videos. What else, sweetie? Anything else we need to talk about this week? Oh, thank you for our Patreons. We are Patreon. If you aren't familiar, there's 3 ways that people have been donating to us because they like what we're doing. And one of those is Patreon. We also have a PayPal link, and there's even a P.O. box if you'd rather use mail. We've had people already been donating to us on all three avenues, and we just want to give a big shout out and thank you to everyone that supported us, because it just really it keeps us going. You know what I mean? It helps us do this, and when I have to take away from my regular job to spend time doing this, it helps that greatly. And so this is one of the reasons why it's been over a year and the channel's growing, and we're excited about that. And we want to thank that to you in return, because you've basically been a big part of making that a reality for us. So we're humbled, we're grateful, and we just want to say a big thank you. Yes, we have a new series happening on Kingdom in Context this year, and it's called Torah Apologetics. And I'm excited about the show because we're actually going to be digging, each episode will be digging into different ways to tackle this debate, this big topic that's being had right now amongst many believers, which is this idea of, I'm a disciple of Jesus Christ. Do I need to keep the commandments of God, or do I not? If I don't, what does that mean? And if I do, what does that mean, right? So we're going to be going over the scriptures back and forth. There's even interviews that we're doing, live discussions. And I hope to make it engaging and entertaining so that it can be something you could take away and share with friends, especially people that are still in the modern mainstream church that are kind of, asking questions about this topic, right, and saying, well, does it still apply to me? I mean, these statements from Jesus seem pretty clear, which is many of the things that have brought a lot of people to that conclusion and that asking those kind of questions. So my goal is to have each episode address some of these big key factors, or these big key discussion points, if you will, about that topic. And hopefully it's beneficial for both people, for people that are transitioning into this idea of understanding the eternal Torah, right? Which is a branch on the actual tree, the context tree, because it is a huge theme of context from start to finish throughout the scriptures, is this idea that God's instructions for living started when things started living.
Right, and the goal of the series is exactly what it sounds like, Torah Apologetics. So as we're always saying, we want you guys to be ready with an answer, and it's not just an answer for the unbeliever. We want you to be ready with an answer for anyone who asks you why you bother being obedient to the Torah. And Sean's also going to be showcasing some interviews that he has with people. And I have to say, I think you guys are going to learn a lot from the discussion itself, because really, we're not trying to debate or argue or one-up people or gotcha questions to people. We really just want to encourage discussion between the people who want to keep the Torah, the people who think we don't need to, even the Jews who don't accept Yeshua and think we shouldn't bother keeping the Torah, and that kind of stuff. So we really just want a wide range of people, for you guys to see Sean speaking with and asking questions to, and getting their input and their perspective on these things. Because the better we understand their perspective, the better we can dive into our scriptures and figure out how to respond to those perspectives. So,
speaking of scriptures, there'll be lots of scriptures in each episode. So hopefully it'll be a resource as well for you to go to when you need to say, well, man, how do I answer that question? Or what's going on there? Where's the scriptures on that? Or, Galatians.
Right.
Galatians.
I mean, we might be biased. Like, I might be biased. I feel like if you were to just watch all our kingdom portions, you'd have fantastic apologetics. Like, this is what has helped me with my apologetics, is studying these verse by verse with my husband every week in the Torah itself, and just focus on that foundation. But these are long episodes. They're deep studies. Not everybody, has the time for it or the attention span to really sit down and watch one. So the Torah Apologetics is going to be more geared towards, the convenience of, being able to pop on a more short teaching and get some of that, quick info.
That's right. That's right. So. And, what's interesting about YouTube is we have the Creator Studio, right? And I can go into the analytics behind the videos, and I can actually see how long people are watching the videos.
Yeah. If you guys wonder why I thank you every time for watching all the way through, it's because we know that stuff.
Yeah, that's why she says that, because we know there's only a percentage of you that actually watch till the end. So, and the way we've tried to structure these conversations we're having about these Kingdom Portion studies is that, we're given serious, in our opinion, we're given serious points of discussion all the way through the video, but we know it's long. That's the nature of the actual Torah study itself. So these Torah Apologetics episodes are going to be shorter and a little more bite-sized, if you will. And so I'm excited about that. We also got Honor of Kings.
Yes.
Second season coming up. So that's awesome. Starting here at the end of April, maybe early May, depends on our scheduling. And we're excited because we've got some special guests this year from various different other YouTube channels and ministries. And we're excited. It's just been so much fun digging in the scriptures with some of these other folks. And comparing these apocryphal books and these books that weren't included in the American canon with the American canon. So make sure to check out Honor of Kings Season 2. It's going to be premiering here in a few weeks. And of course, as always, that'll be with my co-host, Ken Heiderbrecht, and from Hanging on His Words. He's awesome, and we have a great time doing that. Other than that, sweetie, I'd say let's get to Leviticus 14.
I agree.
All right. And verse 1. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, This shall be the law of the leper in the day of his cleansing. Now he shall be brought to the priest, and the priest shall go out to the outside of the camp. Thus the priest shall look, and if the infection of leprosy has been healed in the leper, then the priest shall give orders to take 2 live clean birds and cedar wood, and a scarlet string, and a hyssop for one who is to be cleansed. The priest shall also give orders to slay 1 bird in an earthenware vessel over running water. As for the live bird, he shall take it together with the cedar wood, and the scarlet string, and the hyssop, and shall dip them and the live bird in the blood of the bird that was slain over the running water. He shall then sprinkle 7 times the one who is to be cleansed from the leprosy, and shall pronounce him clean, and shall let the live bird go free over the open field. The one to be cleansed shall then wash his clothes and shave off all his hair, bathe in the water, and be clean. Now afterward he may enter the camp, but he shall stay outside his tent for 7 days. It will be on the 7th day that he shall shave off all his hair. He shall shave his head and his beard and his eyebrows, even all his hair. He shall then wash clothes and bathe his body in water and be clean. Now on the 8th day he is to take 2 male lambs without defect, and a yearling ewe lamb without defect, and 3/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with oil for a grain offering, and 1 log of oil. And the priest who pronounces him clean shall present the man to be cleansed, and the aforesaid before the Lord at the doorway of the tent of meeting. Then the priest shall take the 1 male lamb and bring it for a guilt offering, with the log of oil, and present them as a wave offering before the Lord. Next he shall slaughter the male lamb in the place where they slaughter the sin offering, and the burnt offering at the place of the sanctuary for the guilt offering. Like the sin offering belongs to the priest, it is most holy. The priest shall then take some of the blood of the guilt offering, and the priest shall put it on the lobe of the right ear of one to be cleansed, and on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot. The priest shall also take some of the log of oil and pour it into his left palm. The priest shall then dip his right hand finger into the oil that is in his left palm. With his finger sprinkle some of the oil 7 times before the Lord. Of the remaining oil which is in his palm, the priest shall put some on the right earlobe of the one to be cleansed, and on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot, and on the blood of the guilt offering. While the rest of the oil that's in the priest's palm he shall put on the head of the one to be cleansed. So the priest shall make an atonement on his behalf before the Lord. The priest shall next offer the sin offering and make atonement for the one to be cleansed from his uncleanliness. Then afterward he shall slaughter the burnt offering. The priest shall offer up the burnt offering and the grain offering on the altar. Thus the priest shall make atonement for him, and he will be clean. But if he is poor, and his means are insufficient, then he is to take 1 male lamb for a guilt offering as a wave offering to make atonement for him, and 1/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with oil for a grain offering, and a log of oil, and 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, which are within his means. The one shall be a sin offering, and the other a burnt offering. And then the 8th day he shall bring them for his cleansing to the priest, at the doorway of the tent of meeting before the Lord. The priest shall take the lamb of the guilt offering and the log of oil, and the priest shall offer them for a wave offering before the Lord. Next he shall slaughter the lamb of the guilt offering, and the priest is to take some of the blood of the guilt offering and put it on the lobe of the right ear of the one to be cleansed, and on the thumb of the right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot. The priest also shall pour some of the oil into his left palm, and with his right hand finger the priest shall sprinkle some of the oil that is in his left palm 7 times before the Lord. The priest shall then put some of the oil that is in his palm on the lobe of the right ear of the one to be cleansed, on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot, and on the place of the blood of the guilt offering. Moreover, the rest of the oil that is in the priest's palm he shall put on the head of the one to be cleansed, to make atonement on his behalf before the Lord. He shall then offer one of the turtle doves or young pigeons, which are within his means. He shall offer what he can afford, the one for a sin offering and the other for a burnt offering, together with the grain offering. So the priest shall make atonement before the Lord on behalf of the one to be cleansed. This is the law for him in whom there is no infection of leprosy, whose means are limited for his cleansing. The Lord further spoke to Moses and to Aaron, saying, When you enter the land of Canaan, which I give you for possession, and I put a mark of leprosy on a house in the land of your possession, then the one who owns the house shall come and tell the priest, saying, Something like a mark of leprosy has become visible to me in the house. The priest shall then command that they empty the house before the priest goes in to look at the mark, so that everything in the house need not become unclean. And afterward the priest shall go in to look at the house. So he shall look at the mark, and if the mark on the walls of the house has greenish or reddish depressions and appears deeper than the surface, then the priest shall come out of the house to the doorway and quarantine the house for 7 days. The priest shall return on the 7th day and make an inspection. If the mark is indeed spread on the walls of the house, then the priest shall order them to tear out the stones with the mark in them, and throw them away at an unclean place outside the city. He shall have the house scraped all around inside, and they shall dump the plaster that they scrape off at an unclean place outside the city. Then they shall take their other stones and replace those stones, and he shall take other plaster and replace the house. If, however, the mark breaks out again in the house after he has torn out the stones and scraped the house, and after it has been replastered, then the priest shall come in and make an inspection. If he sees that the mark is indeed spread in the house, it is a malignant mark in the house, it is unclean. He shall therefore tear down the house, its stones and its timbers, and all the plaster of the house. He shall then take them outside of the city to an unclean place. Moreover, whoever goes into the house during the time that he has quarantined it becomes unclean until evening. And likewise, whoever lies down in the house shall wash his clothes, and whoever eats in the house shall wash his clothes. If, on the other hand, the priest comes in and makes an inspection, and the mark is not indeed spread in the house after the house has been replastered, then the priest shall pronounce the house clean because the mark has not appeared. To cleanse the house then, he shall take 2 birds and a cedar wood and a scarlet string and hyssop, and he shall slaughter the one bird in an earthenware vessel over running water. Then he shall take the cedar wood and the hyssop and the scarlet string with the live bird, and dip them in the blood of the slain bird, as well as in the running water, and sprinkle the house 7 times. He shall thus cleanse the house with the blood of the bird and with the running water, along with the live bird, with the cedar wood, and with the hyssop, and with the scarlet string. However, he shall let the live bird go free outside the city in the open field. So he shall make atonement for the house, and it will be clean. This is the law for any mark of leprosy, even for a scale, and for the leprous garment or house, and for a swelling, and for a scab, and for a bright spot, to teach when they are unclean and when they are clean. This is the law of leprosy. Okay, so the priests have to go and inspect a house, basically, right? Now, just as a quick point of note for everyone, at the end of that chapter, it ends with, this is the law for leprosy, and then it repeats everything we read last week in chapter 13, as well as this week in chapter 14. So it's kind of a summation statement, just in case this is the first time you're watching this, and you haven't seen last week's, and you're wondering, when did they read about the clothing and all that stuff, right? Yeah. And the bright spot and the scale and all that. Yeah, that was last week in chapter 13. So
yeah, and just to clarify, I don't know if we made it clear enough last week, but I definitely want to re-clarify this week. Biblical leprosy is not the modern day leprosy of today. The modern leprosy of today is a bacterial infection that causes all kinds of issues, not the least of which being loss of digits and limbs and basically rotting away of the flesh. And I'm going to put a link to an article in the descriptions below so you can go learn a little bit more about this, because this has actually been a topic of conversation for a very long time. There were papers written about it in the early 1900s that we came across, comparing modern leprosy to the actual descriptions of biblical leprosy. The actual descriptions of biblical leprosy are not seen in what's called modern leprosy. It's also known as Hansen's disease. Some guy named Hansen figured out it was actually a bacterial infection. So what people identify as leprosy today, I can guarantee you, is not the leprosy described in the Bible, and leprosy is a rather new word as far as these translations go. Normally it would just be referred to as plague. So I just want to re-clarify, the leprosy of the Bible is not a simple skin disease. There's a lot more going on here than some impetigo or, some dry skin. I mean, there's a lot more happening here, and I just felt like maybe from some comments last week, I thought maybe I should re-clarify and also give you a resource to go check it out for yourself. These are, organizations who work with the lepers in India, and they're big on removing this stigma of the biblical leprosy from modern leprosy, and making sure that people understand the difference. Yeah. So.
And even the word itself came from Jerome's translation, apparently from the Latin Vulgate. So it was just a word choice that he chose to use. Otherwise, it was just traditionally called plague,
right,
and was not defined in the modern medical sense of what they call leprosy today. And I would imagine that those caregivers in India want to differentiate this stigma simply because what culturally comes with it because of the scriptures is if you're calling it leprosy, and that because that was what it was translated as from the scriptures, then you think that you're just cursed by God.
Yes.
Right? When it's an actual, what they're dealing with today in the flesh is an actual bacterial infection, basically, and is not predicated by what we see the causation of it in scripture itself. Right? So this is what we're going to flesh out further in this episode today.
Right.
Because it does seem to have a strong correlation with a specific behavior in the scriptures when people show up with leprosy. And it's not just catching a bacterial infection. So, okay. All right. What stuck out to you in chapter 14, sweetie?
So the first thing that stuck out to me is that this offering that is brought from a leper is quite different from all the other offerings that we've read about prior. So prior, we've got, the typical, the lamb or the goat or the ox, or the turtle dove or the pigeon, and kind of all in separate, you bring a lamb, or if you can't afford that, you bring a turtle dove or a pigeon, so on and so forth. Here we have these 2 birds, plus we have the cedar wood, we have a string of scarlet, and we have the hyssop.
The hyssop branch.
And then later on, we have a few more herd animals that are brought.
2 male lambs, 1 female lamb.
Right.
All in without effect.
But there's just something interesting about these 2 birds and the cedar wood and I'm assuming that the string and the cedar wood and the hyssop were combined together, like the string may be used to tie the hyssop to the wood, and then the hyssop was used.
Yeah, it seems like it's making an actual like a waving thing of some sort, like a stick, the cedar wood would be the base where the handle is.
Right.
The actual hyssop branch would be what you would tie the string, all 3 pieces together, and then you dip it in the blood and the water and you sprinkle it about, or things like that.
This is just what we've come up with reading the descriptions here, because we're not sure how else they could incorporate those 3 objects.
Because they didn't eat it and they didn't burn the cedar wood, and and you didn't tie the string on your finger or something until your leprosy went away.
Right.
This is actually something that I hope that people catch on to. What we actually mentioned at the beginning is this process of cleansing them was after the priest inspected and saw the leprosy went away.
Right.
So this process that we read about in 14 is not healing them. It's after they've been healed, and now they need to be cleansed.
Right, and it's the cleansing of the unrighteousness, the uncleanness. It's just like how we're told in the New Testament that we have a faithful high priest we have a high priest who is faithful to cleanse us of all unrighteousness.
That's right.
So what the cleansing process is the atonement process.
That's right.
Basically.
Yeah. And so it's fascinating because there was so then in all this stuff we read in chapter 13 and 14, where's the actual healing come from?
As far as we can tell, the healing is, it's up to God. It comes from God.
Yeah. So could this make sense of why in verse 34 of chapter 14, he says, when I put a mark of leprosy on you?
Yeah.
Or on your house?
Yeah.
So this is like when Miriam, right, was complaining, had a bad attitude about Moses taking that new wife, the Cushite. And then the angel of the Lord calls Aaron and Miriam, to come stand before him. And then when he departs, she's got leprosy now. Right. And then she has to go outside the camp for 7 days, and then she gets to come back in because it went away. Right. Because she was healed of it. The Father, And so what we want to put forward with this, and what we hope that you see from the scriptures we're going to read over this week, is that this concept of leprosy seems to be instigated with the Father, and cleared up by the Father. And it seems to have to do with your heart. Yeah. When you come before the Father's presence of power and holiness and set apartness, and your heart is messed up, something's wrong. Right. You're going to have an adverse reaction to his holiness, right? So it's like you taking your corrupted nature and you try to step into the presence of holy nature, and the two do not jive. And you, in your corrupted nature, will not win that interaction, right? The holiness will always win that interaction. And this is why all these rules are being put forward, is because these people in this circumstance were always around the tabernacle of the presence of God. This is where his power and presence was dropped for all the priests to do their duties and everything. So this was a big deal for them. They had to be clean, and they had to have good hearts. Right.
So guys, think about the kingdom. Think about the New Jerusalem. This is going to be the tabernacle to the umpteenth power. I mean, this is going to be the true tabernacle, and this is going to have seriously the presence of God, like all the people who are going to be coming to that city, the people who survived the day of the Lord, who are going to need to come and be healed and get water and food and all of that and learn the ways of the Father, they're not going to be, ritually purified. They're not going to be, clean. They're going to need to learn all these things to be able to come into his presence. And so this is where we are seeing the eternal nature of these chapters, where, of course, we're going to need to know these things in the kingdom. If leprosy, as we think we have, concluded, if leprosy is something that's directly related to being in the presence of the Father while having the wrong heart or being in outright rebellion, then it makes perfect sense that we would need these instructions for what to do to cleanse them. Now, I don't know how it works as far as us being in the Melchizedek priesthood and then there being the lesser priesthood of the Levites. I assume it'll be mainly the Levites doing this, but the Levites are going to be newly chosen out of the mortals who survived the day of the Lord. So they're going to need to learn these things.
There'll probably be a training period.
Yeah,
but
they're going to need to learn these
regardless, things. What as far as interacting with the presence of God in a corrupted state, right? From the different examples that we've seen, we just mentioned Miriam, right, and in the book of Numbers, where she walks away with leprosy after getting close to the angel that went before them, right, the one that was just like flowing with the power of the Father. And then we also see we read about last week in Second Chronicles 26 about Uzziah, right, and how he went into the temple to try to burn incense. He wasn't a priest; he was just a king. And he came away with leprosy, right? Had it for the rest of his life. We also, read about other moments where people would do things and they would have leprosy, okay? So it seems to me, and this is just kind of our speculative conclusion as far as the difference between people either getting leprosy or moments like Numbers 24 when actual plague breaks out and people start instantly dying.
Right.
Like in the moment where Phineas had to go and basically take physical vengeance on the guy who had brought the Midianite woman into the camp defiantly. And so that was an act of defiance. And then other people apparently were okay with this and to some degree. So it was a sense of everyone that was in defiance of this idea that was trying to be enforced and instituted was being resulted in this instant death plague that was happening, right? Because remember, the presence of the Lord through this angel that was going before them was in their midst. So if they were to do something that was in defiance of the instructions that they got for this covenant, there was these already, we're going to read about them later in Leviticus 26, but there were all these instructions that were given out to them because remember, the book of Numbers takes place after the book of Leviticus. So even though we haven't gotten to Leviticus 26 yet, it tells us some of the things that will happen if you outright defy the Father's covenant's terms. And so this is what we read happening in this moment when Numbers 24. And so just what's promised in Leviticus 26, plague breaks out. Yeah. And so this concept of, but what we're thinking is this leprosy is more of like a warning phase, if you will, right? And
also a sign. I mean, it's not solely having the wrong heart and being in the presence of the Father. Because clearly, we have Yeshua talking about the man who was born blind, not because his parents were in sin, but so that the works of God could be shown through him. And that could very well be the possibility with even the lepers of his day. I mean, I don't know if the presence of the Father was dropping into that temple at that time. I don't know. It doesn't say that every single one of those lepers had a bad heart or anything like that. So just to clarify, we're not saying it's only an affliction that occurs in this circumstance of being in the presence of the Father.
We're saying there's a lot of evidence that we see continually.
We're saying there's a lot of evidence, and mainly that this is an act of the Father. This is not some random disease that people can just contract.
So essentially, it's like testing the waters. Okay, so if you're the Almighty God and you've put forth this idea that you're trying to dwell in a sense, you're trying to dwell in the midst of an unclean people that do not know your ways, that are struggling to adopt the right heart. What does he call them initially? A wicked and rebellious generation, right? That he's having to deal with in the wilderness. And he's trying to actually, for their own good, he's trying to dwell with them in their midst. But he has to put all these precautions up and even puts up signs as an intermediary stage for them to understand they're transgressing or they're out of whack, if you will. They're out of alignment with what he's wanting them to behave like and to be like and to adjust their behavior so they can be around him, and then he can protect them and bless them and everything will go well for them. So he's, in a sense, he's trying to pull off the impossible.
Yeah.
He's a holy God, and he's trying to interact with an unholy people. And he has all these safeguards and these preventative measures for them so that they can actually be around him, because he wants to be around them. Otherwise, he would have never went through all this effort. Right? And so this is the concept of, if they're not actually going to learn this new behavior and do it, in severe cases, there's instant death that happens. But in other cases, it seems like there's like intermediary warning signs, if you will. And this leprosy thing seems to be one of them, because you can just get better according to if he heals you or not after 7 or even 14 days. And to me, that seems like a wonderful time period to adjust your heart. Right? And physically become unclean in case you became, you brought forward to the temple and you were unclean, and this happened as a result. You can now go and be quarantined and become clean again physically, if your heart was already in line. And stick with us to our pairings, because we're going to read about the inverse of that in 2 Chronicles 30, where people did not prepare their bodies right, even though their hearts were right. And so we'll read about what happens there. So it's interesting.
Yeah, because if there's one thing we always want to stress, it's always about the heart. Another contrast that we see is the levels of severity of punishment, I guess would be the way to phrase it. So we have in the New Testament, it talks about, teachers being held to a greater judgment. And I really do think that we see that concept played out in some of these instances in the Old Testament. Specifically here we have with Nadab and Abihu. So they were in the presence of the Father. They were physically clean. They had just been through their 7 days of ordination, their purification. They had done their atonement sacrifices. They were physically prepared to be in the presence of the Father. They're also not just priests, but they're of the high priestly line. So they're held to a much higher standard. So when they go sideways in their hearts and decide to act in rebellion, they're snuffed out immediately. And so some might wonder, well, why could Uzziah go into the temple and essentially do kind of basically the same thing that Nadab and Abihu did, but he, only got leprosy? Well, he wasn't a priest. He should have known the law, but he also wasn't being held to the same standard as a priest. So
they were definitely held to a much higher standard. Because they were, I think this is what in the book of James he's talking about, you should not all desire to be teachers. The priests were teachers in this congregation back in the wilderness. That was part of their function and duty. Not just all these ordinances and rituals for atonement, but they were actually supposed to teach the law of God to the people as well. And we get that expounded to us in Malachi chapter 2. So it's just, you've got Uzziah as a king, but he's definitely not, in a sense, held to the same standard as even the high priest's family. Which
honestly, the more that we have studied these books in the Bible, the more uncomfortable I have felt with this concept of teaching that we're already a royal priesthood right now. We're just spiritually priests and things like that. To me, my respect and reverence for this position has just grown exponentially. And I fear putting myself in that position, in this, corruptible flesh, we don't even have an earthly priesthood right now. So to me, it seems kind of audacious almost to be, walking around kind of like, oh, well, I'm already a priest, well, no, you're not. If you were, I don't know. I feel like with the state that all of us are in, we might all be walking around white as snow, because...
Well, there's several qualifiers that do not fit that statement. Okay, when people say, I'm already in the royal priesthood, haven't you read 1 Peter? And I'm like, guys, the royal priesthood, for one, just use that word priest is not just a willy-nilly thing. You can't just throw around the word priest and adopt that to you. There's strict definitions for the role of a priest. And none of those are filled right now. Anyone that's claiming that, and we say this in absolute love, if you're watching this video and you think that you're a part of the royal priesthood already, which we've already said in multiple episodes and shown from Scripture, you do not reach that until the resurrection. That's something promised to you at the resurrection once you get your incorruptible body and you're raised to immortal life. The same immortal life that Yeshua received, he's the first fruits of the first resurrection. We get our resurrection later and get into that priesthood that he has. And so if you think you're already a part of that because that's what you've been taught, where's the temple that you minister in? And people will say, oh, but my body's the temple of the Holy Spirit. Yes. It holds the seal, the deposit of the Holy Spirit that was given to you upon your faith and obedience, right? As you're in not only God, but his Son as Messiah over you. And that's wonderful. But there's specific definitions for someone that's called a priest. You minister to the Father in a sanctuary, and you're going to be teaching righteousness to others.
Yeah, you minister the law.
You're ministering the law, and you're teaching the law to people. And this is a huge charge to be considered an actual priest and to be of the royal priesthood, which is this concept of being in the Melchizedek priesthood that's even higher than the Levitical priesthood. This is where Hebrews chapter 8 even tries to expound to us that if Yeshua himself were on the earth, he would not be a priest. Right. Because the ground priesthood is already given to Levites' descendants down through Aaron and even to Zadok, right? So this is a concept of a specified priesthood given as a Levitical priesthood from Aaron's descendants, if you will, whereas the Melchizedek priesthood is one that's held in the kingdom of heaven. So within the gates of the New Jerusalem, within the boundary of what's called the paradise of God, the house of God, is that Melchizedek priesthood functioning, which is why Yeshua in Hebrews 4:14 ascended through the heavens to get to that sanctuary and minister before the Father. Otherwise, he would not be a priest on the ground on earth. That's a totally different concept. Yeah. So this is why the Bible goes through great detail to explain to you that the house of God is coming down, the New Jerusalem, to set down on the ground as promised. And within those boundaries is called the kingdom of heaven, wherein it has its own priesthood called the Melchizedek priesthood, which will be all the resurrected saints under the authority of our high priest forever, Yeshua of Nazareth, right? So this is outside that kingdom will be the regular earth, right? Which is where all the Levitical priesthood will be reinstated, according to Jeremiah 33 and Isaiah 66 and Ezekiel 44 and other places, right? So this is why we're always trying to stress, like, there is, I understand your heart, sweetie. We've been studying about the priests that were given great responsibility, and then whenever they transgress, there's great judgment that happens at the same time. So this is why it was such an honor for them to be in this position. And why we see over the course of these last 14 chapters, we've seen Aaron's behavior change drastically. Yeah. So, I don't think this is the same guy that made the golden calf at Sinai. Yeah. After losing his two sons, after the ordination process, after these events that have been happening, I think Aaron is learning, okay, this is serious.
Yeah.
This is super serious.
Quite a bit.
Like, we've got a holy God who's trying to interact with us, and we need to abide by the instructions he gave us, so that we can interact with him. Right.
Yeah, and then even throughout the rest of the story in the book, we see this loss of the respect for that role of the priest. Yeah. And we see that the problem became these men who just consistently did not hold themselves to the standard that they were called to hold themselves to in order to call themselves priests.
Yeah, Eli's children,
right.
His sons' priests were taking advantage of young women at the temple.
Yeah.
Big no-no. Jeez, big no-no. Wow. So that's, what is that? 1 Samuel chapter 6, maybe? 1 Samuel chapter 2? I can't remember off the top of my head. But that's, and over the course of history throughout the Israelites, from going from the wilderness to becoming a nation, the priesthood was constantly under attack. And the enemy just desperately wants to take out those who are supposed to represent the truth of God. And that position was supposed to be to the priests, and then below them would be the elders, and then disseminated through other leaders throughout the community, obviously to every head of household. Right. But essentially, the priesthood itself, that was a big deal. That was supposed to be your bastion of righteousness as far as you can attain through obedience on the earth. Right. They were supposed to be set apart in their behavior. So the enemy's been attacking that as long as it's been around. And to the point of knowing that Yeshua was prophesied to be a high priest, they crucified him on a cross, thinking they could try to kill him off, right? So this is why the priesthood itself was being corrupted during the days of Yeshua, which is why John the Baptist, who was in the Levitical priest line that was supposed to be the next high priest, he's also beheaded and killed. So there's this whole concept that they were, Rome was putting plants into not only the government through the scribes, the Pharisees, but also with the priesthood, so that they continued propagating the traditions of men and getting away from the truth of the actual commandments of God, which would lead people to understanding truth, to discern doctrines that were bad for them or that were self-imposed onto the Torah. And so this was, this is why Jesus was walking around everywhere chastising and reprimanding and calling hypocrites the Pharisees, calling them brood of vipers, you know what I mean? Because they were taking the priesthood and they were just molding it to what they wanted it to be instead of actually following the words in the scriptures. That pattern has continued today.
Yeah.
in Judaism, that has continued today. And so this is why that battle and that struggle for truth is still ongoing as far as sound doctrine.
Yeah, since coming to realize just how foundational this concept of the priesthoods is to the scriptures, I've noticed how the enemy has completely counterfeited the concept of priesthood in a majority of his false religions. I mean, not the least of which being Catholicism has a counterfeit priesthood. Mormonism actually claims the Melchizedek priesthood. Satanism, they have their priesthoods. So it's interesting that even the concept itself is something that he takes, he counterfeits, he perverts, and then he obfuscates for the people in the body who are trying to learn the word. You know, all the teachings that come out in the body over the last however many hundreds of years, you know, none of them are really focusing on the priesthood, and people have kind of, you know, not been taught to realize just how integral of a role this is his role, other than being the one who resurrects us, our Redeemer and our King. He's our high priest, and that's huge.
That's huge.
So it's interesting.
It's huge. And it's all throughout, this concept of the priesthoods is all throughout the scriptures.
Right.
Again, that's why I put it as a branch on the actual context tree, because it's important. It matters tremendously.
Right.
And so, unique to me, sweetie, is that when I look at kind of take a bird's eye view, if I would, of everything we've read in Leviticus so far, we get this idea of just the whole context of what we've been reading about. You know, the first 7 chapters about doing different types of sacrifices and differentiating between, you know, what's holy and what's set apart, as far as, you know, how they were making atonement. And then we went into, you know, the idea of uncleanliness and corruption, both inward and outward. This idea where, you know, Aaron's sons, after being ordinated, messed up, and they you know, inwardly were doing things wrong, and received an outward judgment. And so even down to the concept of them transmitting holiness to the people, which is why they had to change their garments, which is what we were talking about earlier, about interacting with a corrupted people with a set apart holiness from the power of God. So the priests even had to change their garments, right? Because quote unquote, this holiness was on them.
Yeah, and that's actually something we talked about in a previous episode with Ezekiel, talking about the Levites at that time. And I was like, kind of perplexed at what is this transmitting holiness thing. Well, this leprosy concept is kind of making, you know, that makes sense to me quite a bit more. I mean, if they could contract leprosy because the priests have holiness on their garments, however that works on a physics level, I could not explain. But
well, it's simply, you know, the burning bush moment with Moses. The sandals that he had used to walk up to that place, he had to remove them so that his clean feet could be sitting in that clean area, which is remove your sandals, this is holy ground, right? And then in that moment, he's the power of God has been exemplified to Moses, even with the sign of leprosy, putting his hand in and out and healing him of the leprosy, you know, that was quickly put on him as a sign. So just convincing Moses of the idea of, you know, you're going to be carrying with you as a prophet, and also with this staff, the power of God, right? But that kind of, if you, in a sense, kind of transitioned to this angel that went before them. Once they started leaving Exodus, they had a personal guide and bodyguard, if you will. So, but I just think overall, this whole, you know, because then after we read from chapters 8, 9, and 10, we read about, you know, chapter 11, what you can eat, what you cannot eat. So this whole, that would affect, of course, you know, the inward cleanliness, right? And how you could come before the Father or not. And I think it's interesting that in chapter 9 of Leviticus, Aaron does not eat the sin offering because he just lost his 2 children that day from Nadab and Abihu sinning and bringing strange fire before the Lord. And he was not punished for that. The Father understood because his heart wasn't in it to eat the sin offering that day.
And he acknowledged it. He was like,
that's right.
If I did it, it wouldn't have been right.
So the instructions for the first 7 chapters, 8 chapters really, about being set apart and making atonement for holiness, right, with these sacrifices. We've got chapter 9, Nadab and Abihu do wrong, right? And we see judgment for them not acting set apart. But then even Aaron trying to do what's right, but he doesn't have the heart to do it, and he's not punished for it.
Right.
And then we get cleanliness instructions for how you can eat, as far as trying to come before the Lord in His holiness. And then here we go into this whole leprosy thing about, well, what happens? So to me, this leprosy idea is that, if you haven't done any of these things properly for all this context from the first 10 to 11 chapters, and you leave, you come before the Lord with your gift or whatever, and maybe you didn't do your purification rituals right, well, you go home and suddenly there's leprosy on your leather bag, or there's leprosy on your skin, or there's leprosy in your house. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So then it's like they were constantly 3 times a year at the very minimum, they had to come before the Lord. And so to me, this would be perfectly understandable on a broad scale why we're reading about this now in Leviticus, because they just went through all this concept of how they're going to interact with the holy presence of the Father. And then when they walk away from that, are there any after effects, good or bad?
Right. And going into His presence physically unclean, but having the right heart, Sean isn't saying that He will punish you for that.
No.
We're talking about, there's these two concepts. There's going to His presence with a bad heart and receiving leprosy. And then there's this concept of some sort of physics going on that we may not understand, where they're going to this holy place and they might not have been prepared properly to go to that holy place.
Right.
Holiness was transmitted to them or something.
Which is what we're going to read about later.
Yeah. And then they might come home and have an adverse reaction from that. And then the priest would be coming and determining that. And so.
Which is what we just read in 14
Right.
about checking their house out, basically. And we read in 13 about checking out like the warp and the woof and the basically clothing materials, even leather, things like that. So, yes, there's all of it. So what I'm getting at for the viewer, in case you've never read Leviticus or studied Leviticus, if you take a bird's eye view of these first 14 chapters, they all flow together.
Yeah.
We're all talking about how these people were trying to interact with the holy presence of the Father.
Yeah.
And so there's different facets of it. And it's all very, very practical if you understand actually what's being put forward here and why these protocols and precautions would need to be put in place.
Right.
So do you want to start with chapter 15?
Yeah. Starting chapter 15. The Lord also spoke to Moses and to Aaron, saying, Speak to the sons of Israel and say to them, When any man has a discharge from his body, his discharge is unclean. This, moreover, shall be his uncleanness in his discharge. If it is his uncleanness, whether his body allows its discharge to flow, or whether his body obstructs its discharge. Every bed on which the person which the discharge lies becomes unclean, and everything on which he sits becomes unclean. Anyone, moreover, who touches his bed shall wash his clothes and bathe in water and be unclean until evening. And whoever sits on the thing on which the man with the discharge has been sitting shall wash his clothes, and bathe in water and be unclean until evening. Also, whoever touches the person with the discharge shall wash his clothes and bathe in water and be unclean until evening. Or if the man with the discharge spits on one who is clean, he too shall wash his clothes and bathe in water and be unclean until evening. Every saddle on which the person with the discharge rides becomes unclean. Whoever then touches any of the things which were under him shall be unclean until evening, and he who carries them shall wash his clothes and bathe in water and be unclean until evening. Likewise, whomever the one with the discharge touches without having rinsed his hands in water shall wash his clothes and bathe in water and be unclean until evening. However, an earthenware vessel which the person with the discharge touches shall be broken, and every wooden vessel shall be rinsed in water. Now when the man with the discharge becomes cleansed from his discharge, then he shall count off for himself 7 days for his cleansing. He shall then wash his clothes and bathe his body in running water and will become clean. Then on the 8th day he shall take for himself 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, and come before the Lord to the doorway of the tent of meeting, and give them to the priest. And the priest shall offer them, one for a sin offering and the other for a burnt offering. So the priest shall make atonement on his behalf before the Lord because of his discharge. Now if a man has a seminal emission, he shall bathe all his body in water and be unclean until evening. As for any garment or any leather on which there is a seminal emission, it shall be washed with water and be unclean until evening. If a man lies with a woman so that there is a seminal emission, they shall both bathe in water and be unclean until evening. When a woman has a discharge, if her discharge in her body is blood, she shall continue in her menstrual impurity for 7 days, and whoever touches her shall be unclean until evening. Everything also on which she lies during her menstrual impurity shall be unclean, and everything on which she sits shall be unclean. Anyone who touches her bed shall wash his clothes and bathe in water and be unclean until evening. Whoever touches anything on which she sits shall wash his clothes and bathe in water and be unclean until evening. Whether it be on the bed or on the thing on which she is sitting, when he touches it, he shall be unclean until evening. If a man actually lies with her so that her menstrual impurity is on him, he shall be unclean 7 days, and every bed on which he lies shall be unclean. Now, if a woman has a discharge of her blood many days, not at the period of her menstrual impurity, or if she has a discharge beyond that period, all the days of her impure discharge she shall continue as though in her menstrual impurity she is unclean. Any bed on which she lies all the days of her discharge shall be to her like her bed at menstruation, and everything on which she sits shall be unclean, like her uncleanness at that time. Likewise, whoever touches them shall be unclean, and shall wash his clothes and bathe in water and be unclean until evening. When she becomes clean from her discharge, she shall count off for herself 7 days, and afterward she will be clean. Then on the 8th day she shall take for herself 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, and bring them in to the priest, to the doorway of the tent of meeting. The priest shall offer one for a sin offering, and the other for a burnt offering. So the priest shall make atonement on her behalf before the Lord because of her impure discharge. Thus you shall keep the sons of Israel separated from their uncleanness, so that they will not die in their uncleanness by defiling my tabernacle that is among them. This is the law for the one with a discharge, and for the man who has a seminal emission, so that he is unclean by it, and for the woman who is ill because of menstrual impurity, and for the one who has a discharge, whether a male or female, or a man who lies with an unclean woman.
Well, thank you, sweetie.
You're welcome.
Okay, real quick. What's the initial discharge it was referring to? Is that like a runny nose or a flu?
That's kind of the only thing I can think of.
Yeah.
A runny nose. Yeah, that's kind of the only thing I can think of as far as what this discharge could be.
Possibly. Like if you just got sick and it's time to go up for Feast of Tabernacles or something.
Which all these precautions would make sense.
Mm-hmm.
I mean...
Because kind of, you don't want to get any of your bodily fluids on anything that's set apart and clean. Right. So, Interesting. By the way, we just want to make sure people understand verse 24, where it's talking about lying with a woman. If you look up in the Hebrew, then that particular passage, it's just talking about lying next to a woman. We don't, in our particular studies, we don't feel like it's talking about intercourse at that particular moment.
Right. So, because we're going to get to a couple of verses later on where there is a very clear, strict prohibition on lying with a woman on her menstrual period. Mm-hmm. But that's lying with a woman to uncover her nakedness, we found is the term. This would really mainly, possibly, most likely, be talking about a husband and a wife who sleep in the same bed together. Right. So if at any point you've ever thought that, if you're a couple and you've thought you can't sleep in bed with your husband during your time of your period, that's not actually in here. It's okay. You guys can sleep in the same bed.
Yeah. And what's interesting, though, is all these concepts here are pertaining to them being clean and unclean as far as what? Going to the temple.
Exactly. Right?
Going to be before the presence of God, which is everything we just tried to explain and talk about in relationship to this adverse reaction that we've concluded in our studies that comes about from this leprosy idea of going to the temple and being unclean in some regard, whether inside or outside. Right. So this is, I guess what I'm trying to say is, can husbands and wives have sex on, say, Shabbat?
You're really going to bring it up, aren't you?
We'll get to that in another episode, guys.
Oh, you're not going to bring it up. Okay.
We just want to remind folks that these instructions for cleanliness, many of them have to do with actually you preparing yourself on the outside to go be in the presence of God that was physically on the ground in the days of Israel's, wandering in the wilderness with the tabernacle of the tent of meeting, and then later on as a nationhood with the actual temple that was constructed. So these were very specific circumstances that these rules are applying to. Going to church on Sunday or going to a Sabbath meeting on Saturday, do you need to be clean to go to somebody's house for a Sabbath fellowship?
I mean, contextually speaking, you're not required. I personally like to honor the Sabbath day proleptically. I like to look at it as this is the day of the week that symbolizes his kingdom and us living in his kingdom. So I like
we do our best to actually try to abide by these as much as possible.
Yeah.
But some people do take that very far, right? And they'll say, well, man, a woman will say, if I'm on my menstrual time, I can't even sit in the same chair, the couch, I can't be next to my husband, I can't sleep in the same bed.
Right.
Is that in Scripture?
No, it's not in Scripture. It's telling you what happens when you do these things. It's not saying don't do these things. It's not saying, wife, you need a whole separate bed and a separate lazy boy for yourself for that time of the month and things like that. Because you guys might be wondering where this is coming from. Some of you might, but I've had conversations with women who these are the lengths that they go to while they're on their cycle, where they will sleep in a totally different bed and they'll have a totally separate chair and they won't cook for their family for a week because they think everything they touch is going to make all their children unclean. That's the extreme that we're talking about. That's not in Scripture. And
what if the beginning of this chapter is what we think, and having just a runny nose is the discharge it's talking about,
right?
And that mother has already been sniffling, and making food for their family anyway, right? So again, we have to keep this in the context of what this is for these people, right? And yes, in the future, when we're raised incorruptible, given glorified bodies, the laws written on our hearts, we're in the kingdom with Yeshua, none of this is going to matter. We'll be perpetually clean, right? But in this circumstance, with the Israelites in the desert and the wilderness, having to learn these protocols for being around the powerful presence of set-apart holiness from the Father, they need to learn what this was. So in our modern life, there's no temple, the power of God is not dropped on anything, right? In fact, we're in the dispersion that's been prophesied that the only new temple that's coming is after the day of the Lord's New Jerusalem. So these things physically is not something that I feel people need to stress to such a great degree that they're not interacting with their family for a week, right? That is where you've now taken things out of context and they become a burden to you, as opposed to the freedom of understanding and reading the Scripture in context and seeing that, would you have to worry if you're on your monthly time let's say you're in Kansas in 2019, or are we talking about a lady who's literally living within 100 yards of the tabernacle, the power of God, and it needs to go to, say, the Feast of Pentecost soon. Right? So it's like, Feast of First Fruits, Feast of Weeks. So this is the concept that was very, very specific and definitely mattered greatly for them, right?
Yeah.
But in our modern day, we may not need stress out so much about some of these things.
Right. Yeah, Sean and I would encourage a balance of, because a lot of the commandments we're obeying, guys, we can't technically obey to the letter, so we're doing a memorial of these things. Like all of us, when we keep Passover this year, we can't keep it according to the letter, so we're all going to have a memorial Passover meal. Right. And it's kind of the same idea with a lot of these cleanliness laws and the taboo subject my husband so wonderfully brought up a moment ago of
and we'll get there in the future.
Yeah, of husbands and wives, doing that on the Sabbath. And for us, we feel like that is an area of the cleanliness laws that we would like to memorialize on that one day out of the 7 for ourselves, because that is the one day every week that's the day. I think everybody at least agrees that that's the day that truly symbolizes the millennial reign and the kingdom itself.
Being in the presence of the Father.
Right, and when we're in the presence of the Father. And so, I mean, aside from all the other things you could talk about with it as far as, focusing on something totally, that gets you totally distracted from the Father and His Word and things like that. We feel that you can find a balance here. It's it's okay to still obviously be hygienic. But you don't have to go to such extremes on either side. You don't have to go to the extreme of, well, we're not anywhere near that temple, so it doesn't matter how dirty I get on the Sabbath, or going to the extreme of having a whole separate bedroom for, when you're on your monthly cycle. So. This we just definitely keep things in the context of how they're being described in the Scriptures, and then however much you want to do, that's fine. That's up to each family, each individual. Just make sure it's not, causing strife, I guess, in a sense, and also you're just not taking it to such a place where it's so far out of context that it's now a burden to you, or that it's now causing you to, how would I say this? Break other commandments. Yeah.
because that's what Judaism was famous for doing.
Yeah.
They would take these things way too far and create all these extra little guide rails so that you don't break a commandment, but then in turn cause you to break a whole bunch of other commandments.
Right.
You know what I mean? So like this whole concept is that, if you're trying to actually live in a way that Yeshua lived, and you're trying to do this in a wonderful facet, well, there's some practicality in that, right? Well, I'm not living near a temple, and I can't go to it 3 times a year as instructed in the law, because we're in the dispersion, which was what was prophesied. That's why we always try to remind people that. Because there's a lot of people that will say, well, why aren't you going to Jerusalem every year?
Exactly.
No, well, there's context there.
Yeah.
There's a lot of description about why the last 2,000 years has been the way it has, and no new temple's been built yet. So there's a whole point of that that's in Scripture explained to us by the Heavenly Father. So for these particular things here, if you want to memorialize some of these cleanliness laws, and just as we do with Leviticus 11, right? We eat clean, even though we're not going to a temple, because we know there's other good uses for these things, right? As far as interaction with each other and with our body cleanliness, like she said, hygiene, and also honoring the Sabbath in a way that just lets you focus on the Father.
Yeah.
So there's in moderation, but also with diligent study of Scripture is what we would suggest. But ultimately, sweetie, something I want to kind of make sure the viewer understands at this point. Everything we read about in 13, 14, and 15, okay, about becoming unclean, all the way back to 11, really. I mean, this whole concept of eating well, how do you become unclean, in chapter 12 about after you have a baby and you want to come back to the temple or whatever, come back to the presence of God. 13 and 14, leprosy, whether you can come to the presence of God or not, right? And then now with these personal interactions, whether there's discharge or seminal emission or sex or different things about how becoming temporary unclean,
right,
if you needed to go to the presence of God in that temporary moment. All of this, I just want to lovingly share with the viewer, all of this, once we're resurrected and made into that royal priesthood that's promised to us, we're given that divine nature, as 1 Peter talks about. We're put into this Melchizedek priesthood that Yeshua is the first fruits of, and he's already in this concept. Once we get to that spot, then it's my personal conclusion that we'll be able to fulfill that John 10 statement from Jesus where he says, the things you see me do, you'll be doing and greater. Right. So Yeshua cleansed the lepers, those who were unclean. And I believe that there will be a time in the future when our glorified, immortal, resurrected bodies will have the power of God flowing through us as well. We'll be able to go out and miraculously heal and cleanse the lepers like Yeshua exemplified.
Yeah, I mean, we might even be, raising the dead. I mean, there's some commands he gave to people in the New Testament that I don't see how we can fulfill at this moment in time. I mean, we don't see this form of leprosy. We don't see this plague as described in Leviticus happening today. Right. So how do we cleanse the lepers? Well, it seems like it might be proleptically. We'll be cleansing them in the kingdom.
And how interesting is that this particular type of leprosy that was very, very synonymous with the actual presence of God being around them. Now that the temple and the presence of God has been gone for a long time, we don't see this kind of stuff anymore at all. And so, but we will if the New Jerusalem house of God filled with his presence comes down on the earth. And as Isaiah 60 and Revelation 21, all the nations come before this city and camp around it for provision and food, for the trees of the river of life that grow along the river, for the medicine from the leaves that grow along the trees of the river of life inside the city, and coming for free water, free food. Yeah, they're getting next to holiness. Yeah. They're getting next to set apartness. And these guys are the survivors of the day of the Lord in this generation. Yeah. Like this, imagine this modern generation, guys. They're going to be, in my opinion, probably is just as bad, if not worse, than what we're reading about this generation in the wilderness, as far as them having to suddenly camp around the tabernacle, the tent of meeting, and realize, oh my goodness, I got to change some behavior quick.
Yeah. Quick. I got to clean up my life, figuratively and literally.
This is why Isaiah 2:2-5 says that they will no longer war. They will be taught the law, and this is part of it that they'll be taught, right? Is how to interact with the power of God and not have adverse reactions afterwards.
Hallelujah.
Right. It'll be a beautiful time, man. Beautiful. So let's go to our first pairing. We're going to be looking at the Brit Hadasha, which is also the New Testament. We'll be reading in Matthew chapter 8, just the first 4 verses.
So starting in verse 1. When Jesus came down from the mountain, large crowds followed him, and a leper came to him and bowed down before him and said, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him, saying, "I am willing, be cleansed." And immediately his leprosy was cleansed. And Jesus said to him, "See that you tell no one, but go, show yourself to the priest, and present the offering that Moses commanded as a testimony to them."
Thank you, sweetie.
You're welcome.
Okay, all right, so he's cleansing the lepers like we just talked about. Hallelujah, amen, right? This is awesome. The power of God's flowing through the anointed one, the Messiah, the Son of God, right? Come to the earth, sent by the Father. And he's got the power flowing through him to do these things, right? And he heals a leper, which is what we just talked about, kind of leading up to this whole concept. What does he tell the leper to do after he heals him?
He tells him to obey the law.
He does. Exactly what we read in Leviticus 14 at the start of this episode, which is, if you've been healed of leprosy, now you take your offering to the priest so he can go through all the instructions we read about in Leviticus 14.
Yep.
Isn't that awesome how that works? Old and New Testament just intimately twined together. It's just amazing, right?
And one thing I want to point out, guys, is that Yeshua healed him based on his faith first, and then he instructed him to keep the commandments. So
that's right.
This attitude of if you're not keeping the commandments, you're not saved, or any of those negative attitudes that we see within some areas of the Torah crowd, it's not in line with his spirit. That's not right. He didn't pull out a clipboard and do a checklist of, "Oh, are you doing this, 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 and that? All right, now I'll heal you." Yeah. It was because of their faith. So.
Well, yeah, that's beautiful.
And then he told them to obey. He did tell them to obey.
That's right. That's right. Because faith always precedes obedience.
Right.
So this guy showed his faith, and then he was commanded to obey. So the next pair I want to look at real quick is actually going to be in Luke chapter 4, and we'll read verses 20 through 29. So here in verse 20, he says, "He closed the book and gave it back to the attendant and sat down. And the eyes of all in the synagogue were fixed on him. And Jesus began to say to them, 'Today this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing.' And all were speaking well of him and wondering at the gracious words which were falling from his lips. And they were saying, 'Is this not Joseph's son?' And he said to them, 'No doubt you will quote this proverb to me, Physician, heal yourself. And whatever we heard was done at Capernaum, do here in your hometown as well.' And he said, 'Truly I say to you, no prophet is welcome in his own hometown. But I say to you in truth, there were many widows in Israel in the days of Elijah, when the sky was shut up for 3 years and 6 months, when a great famine came over all the land. And yet Elijah was sent to none of them, but only to Zarephath in the land of Sidon, to a woman who was a widow. And there were many lepers in Israel in the time of Elisha the prophet, and none of them were cleansed, but only Naaman the Syrian. And all the people in the synagogue were filled with rage as they heard these things, and they got up and drove him out of the city, and led him to the brow of the hill on the city, which their city had been built, in order to throw him down the cliff." Okay.
Incredible.
All right.
Our old pal Naaman.
Murder attempt number 1 on Jesus. And he just had to, brush off the haters. And so they don't throw him off the cliff, by the way, in case you've never read the end of that passage. We just stop there because it reveals their heart.
Right.
Okay, so this is what we've been talking about. All right. He just mentioned only Naaman the leper was healed, and he's from Syria, right? Yeah. And he's like, he wasn't even an Israelite. And there were lepers in that day in the land of Israel, but only Naaman, someone who's not an Israelite, who wasn't originally in covenant, he got healed because he had faith. His heart was good, in a sense, enough, apparently,
Well, it's just another example of what I was talking about earlier with Yeshua saying, it's not always that you're being punished for sin. It's also so the works of God can be shown through you. And here he is, repeating, hearkening back to this story of Naaman, who the works of God was done through him. And
he's using this story of Naaman to the audience he's speaking to exemplify their hearts and how their hearts were not good, which is why they try to kill him.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's just what a poignant little point to make, right? Yeah. It's that moment when you make a statement and people immediately validate your statement by their visceral triggered reaction.
Right.
And they're immediately like, we see that all the time, actually. So our next paragraph we want to run to is Revelation 21, and we're going to be in verse 22 through 27.
All right. I saw no temple in it, for the Lord God the Almighty and the Lamb are its temple, and the city has no need of the sun or the moon to shine on it, for the glory of God has illumined it, and its lamp is the Lamb. The nations will walk by its light, and the kings of the earth will bring their glory to it. In the daytime, for there will be no night there, its gates will never be closed, and they will bring the glory and honor of the nations to it. And nothing unclean, and no one who practices abomination and lying shall ever come into it, but only those whose names are written in the Lamb's book of life.
Okay, awesome. So, what's your thoughts, Rudy?
Oh, well, I mean, obviously we chose that because it says nothing unclean will enter the city. And so we've hopefully established through these last 2 episodes this association with, plague/leprosy and some sort of uncleanness, whether it's physical or, in the heart, and then being in the presence of the Father. So right. Nothing unclean can actually enter this city.
That's right. If I were clean, could I enter it?
He says, blessed are those who wash their robes, so they have rights to enter the gates of the city. And I don't think that's purely figurative.
Right. So in the wilderness, in Sinai, in the wilderness time that we just read about in Leviticus 14 and 15, we're talking with people that were not resurrected saints.
Right.
Okay. They were not in the New Jerusalem, but they had the power of God, the tabernacle of the the tabernacle of the tent of meeting that was in their midst, that held the power of God in a sense. Right. And to be near that, to go in that area, you had to be clean to bring forward your sacrifices. Okay. So if the New Jerusalem's sitting down and you've got millions of people camped around it that want to go inside this amazing, beautiful city made of precious gemstones and highly purified gold and the river of life, and glorified, resurrected saints run around inside and angels run around inside and Yeshua himself run around inside, and they want to go inside. Did the Father give us instructions on how they can get inside?
He certainly did, and this would be why they would need to come and learn this law.
Guys, this is how relevant Leviticus is.
Yeah.
He's telling us how to get in.
Yep.
You think someone that just chomped down a huge, slab of pork ribs is going to be let inside the New Jerusalem?
They probably not until they're clean after evening or whatever. Right. I mean, not till after evening. But.
So, guys, this is the point. All this stuff that we've been reading about in Leviticus, as far as how to prepare your body and your heart in order to be around the presence of the Father, there's a reason for it. There's an eternal reason for it.
Yeah.
Right? And in the physical, in the here, not after death and you're resurrected into a perfect body with a perfect heart, but even in the here and now, in the coming kingdom, the millennial reign, when Yeshua comes down to the earth and the New Jerusalem drops and people have to interact around it and want to go in it, right? Because if you can't go in. If you do, what happens?
Yeah.
If you tell the angel at the gate or whomever, I don't know who's going to be at the gates.
Yeah.
But whomever you tell that is at the gates and you want to get in, and they let you in, and then you break out in plague and break in leprosy.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're going to need someone to heal you, and you're going to need a priest who's be able to identify it, right?
Yeah.
So this is why we've been reading all this stuff. And so we hope that, if possible, we hope that it becomes super real to you to understand why the New Jerusalem is talked about so much. And it's called the city God, the sanctuary of the Father in the Old Testament in different places, Zion. Why the survivors of the day of the Lord would be camped around it. Why they'd be learning the law from Zion and need to know it.
Right.
Why the Father gave it to mankind as they interacted around a copy and shadow of the heavenly sanctuary, which was the temple and the tabernacle in Sinai.
Yeah, how we end up literally being a blessing and a light to all those nations.
Mm-hmm. It's a beautiful, beautiful future if you're trusting in the Father.
Yes.
If you are calling on the name of the Lord, you will be saved. That is only those who are going to fight him at his return, that hate him, that metaphorically and literally have made a covenant with death. They're the ones that are destroyed. The wicked are routed out of the land. But all who call on the name of the Lord will be saved. And in his wonderful instructions given to mankind, he exemplifies, even if you're not glorified yet, how you can interact with him during that time period. So, I mean, guys, did you realize that we were reading about the millennial reign?
Yeah, that's what's so incredible about, and especially Leviticus and Numbers, especially because those are the books that get the bad rap of just being a bunch of arbitrary, random rules that people, until coming to understand the kingdom, people might, think we have no need for and never will again. But no, what does the Psalm 119 say? All his righteous laws are eternal. Eternal.
Established in the heavens. That's right. So, that's right. Our next pairing that we want to look at real quick, folks, is Jubilees 49, and we're going to read verses 8 through 15. And right now we're going to kind of morph into this topic. We've already teased this a couple times in this episode, the idea of what happens, as far as not preparing your heart, there's two concepts we've been talking about, preparing your heart and preparing your body, right, to come to the presence of the Lord. So what happens if you do only one of those two? And we're going to read about two different examples of each side of that coin, if you will.
Right.
Okay, so let's read real quick in Jubilees 49. Here in verse 8, it says, "For it is an eternal ordinance, and engraven on the heavenly tablets regarding all the children of Israel, that they should observe it every year on its day, once a year, throughout all the generations. And there is no limit of days, for this is ordained forever. And the man who is free from uncleanness," excuse me, guys, I just want to let you know, we're reading about Passover, by the way. This is the book of Jubilees explaining concepts about Passover. So here in verse 9, it says, "And the man who is free from uncleanness and does not come to observe it on occasion of its day, so as to bring an acceptable offering before the Lord and to eat and drink before the Lord on the day of its festival, that man who is clean and close at hand shall be cut off. Because he offered not the oblation of the Lord in its appointed season, he shall take the guilt upon himself. Let the children of Israel come and observe the Passover on the day of its fixed time, on the 14th day of the first month, between the evenings, from the third part of the day to the third part of the night. For 2 portions of the day are given to the light, and a third part to the evening. This is what the Lord commanded, that you should observe it between the evenings. And it is not permissible to slay it during any period of the light, but during the period bordering on the evening, and let them eat it at the time of the evening until the third part of the night, and whatever is left over, all of its flesh, from the third part of the night and onwards, let them burn it with fire. And they shall not cook it with water, nor shall they eat it raw, but roast it on the fire. They shall eat it with diligence, its head with the inwards thereof, and its feet that they shall roast with fire, nor break any bone thereof, for of the children of Israel no bone shall be crushed. For this reason the Lord commanded the children of Israel to observe the Passover on the day of its fixed time, and they shall not break a bone thereof, for it is a festival day, and a day commanded. And there may be no passing over from day to day and month to month, but on the day of its festival let it be observed. And do you command the children of Israel to observe the Passover throughout their days, every year, once a year, on the day of its fixed time, and it shall come for a memorial, well-pleasing before the Lord, and no plague shall come upon them to the slay or to smite in that year in which they celebrate the Passover in its season, in every respect according to his command." Okay. All right, so a couple things that I wanted to point out here. One in verse 9 and 10, and also in verse 15. In verse 9, where it talks about the man who is free from uncleanness, so he's prepared his body properly, and it says he's close at hand, which means he's actually literally close enough to actually travel to where the temple or the tabernacle was to observe Passover and bring his offering, but he doesn't.
Right.
So this means his heart has kept him from doing, even though his body was, all those things we just read about in Leviticus 15, right? So he wasn't unclean in this moment for any reason whatsoever, and he wasn't too far away that he could not have made this journey to get to the temple or tabernacle, and if he doesn't do it, this reveals his heart is not in it, okay? And so this is bad for him, right? Let him be cut off from his people. It's bad for him.
Right. It's possible this is what Paul was talking about when he was talking about not forsaking the gathering of the assembly.
Very possibly. Could be. I haven't thought of that.
Just popped into my head.
Could be. Yeah. But here in verse 15, it's talking about celebrating the Passover every year on its appointed day and time, so as a memorial, well-pleasing before the Lord, and no plague shall come upon them to slay or to smite them. Okay? Yep. So we just read about plague happening, different types of plague, right? But a less severe idea of leprosy, and then a more severe idea of immediate death in different circumstances. But is this saying, sweetie, and there's actually Leviticus 26 applies this, and I know we've mentioned it a couple of times, even though we haven't got to that portion yet, but is this actually saying if I don't keep Passover, I'm going to die?
Well, contextually, no.
Okay.
If you read it out of context, yeah, you might read it that way.
So here's the thing, guys. This is a concept here where he's saying, look, Passover was commanded as an instruction. Okay, so this is why in verse 14 he says, For it is a festival and a day commanded. Okay, so this has become now a commandment. It's an instruction. It's called Torah, right? It's an instruction from the Father to them in covenant with him, saying, please do this on this day and this time. And if you don't, it's called an act of defiance. You're outwardly and acting in defiance toward the Lord against things he's commanded towards you, especially under the previous context of if a man has actually clean, right? If he can do it, he's close, he's nearby, and he's clean. And you're actively defying this concept. And if he's talking now as far as the children of Israel, as a congregation, as a people group, if they do not keep this memorial every year, this Passover concept, then plague may break out. Now, we actually read about this in Leviticus 26.
Right.
There's several different passages in that full-on chapter there where he says, if you're acting in outward defiance, these bad things will happen to you, and some of those are plague. Some of them are much worse, actually, but that's just one of them that does. So I'll let the viewer go check that. Go read Leviticus 26 on your own. In fact, homework for this week: read all of Leviticus. So if you get caught up in 26 and it's fascinating, read all of Leviticus because it matters. It's a great book to know because it'll help you with the New Testament.
Yeah.
So this is the concept here in Jubilees 49:15 as going over Passover and because this same concept, as Leviticus 26 explains, would apply to all the other instructions that were commanded.
Right.
If they were, as a congregation, as a nation, if they were outright defying the covenant that they went into with the Father, that their forefathers had faithfully kept, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, then all these bad things would have happened to them, and plague was just one of them. So it's just being mentioned here. So we just want to kind of bring some greater context to that idea so people don't think that if you don't keep Passover, you're going to be smitten with plague or killed or something.
Or people who think if we can't keep it perfectly right now, we shouldn't bother or anything like that. That's what we're saying about not being able to keep these commandments according to the letter, but we're still supposed to be keeping them as a memorial until he returns.
Because in the example of what we read in verse 9 and 10, the guy who was clean and was close to the temple and could keep it but did not because basically it revealed his heart. Well, we may, in our modern day today, with no temple, because it's still in heaven, it hasn't come down yet, may be clean and our heart may be ready, but we can't do it. Right. So, the Father understands. This is why he goes over it in prophecy, so he knows that we know that he understands. So our next passage we want to run to is going to be out of the Nevi'im, the prophets, and we're looking in 2 Chronicles chapter 30. And so if you'd like to join us there, we're going to start reading in verse 13 and go through 27.
Okay, starting in verse 13. Now many people were gathered at Jerusalem to celebrate the Feast of Unleavened Bread in the 2nd month, a very large assembly. They arose and removed the altars which were in Jerusalem. They also removed all the incense altars and cast them into the brook Kidron. Then they slaughtered the Passover lambs on the 14th day of the 2nd month. And the priests and the Levites were ashamed of themselves and consecrated themselves and brought burnt offerings to the house of the Lord. They stood at their stations after their custom, according to the law of Moses, the man of God. The priests sprinkled the blood which they received from the hand of the Levites. For there were many in the assembly who had not consecrated themselves. Therefore, the Levites were over the slaughter of the Passover lambs for everyone who was unclean, in order to consecrate them to the Lord. For a multitude of the people, even many from Ephraim and Manasseh, Issachar and Zebulun, had not purified themselves. Yet they ate the Passover otherwise than prescribed, for Hezekiah prayed for them, saying, May the good Lord pardon everyone who prepares his heart to seek God, the Lord God of his fathers, though not according to the purification rules of the sanctuary. So the Lord heard Hezekiah and healed the people. The sons of Israel present in Jerusalem celebrated the Feast of Unleavened Bread for 7 days with great joy, and the Levites and the priests praised the Lord day after day with loud instruments to the Lord. Then Hezekiah spoke encouragingly to all the Levites who showed good insight in the things of the Lord. So they ate for the appointed 7 days, sacrificing peace offerings and giving thanks to the Lord God of their fathers. Then the whole assembly decided to celebrate the feast another 7 days, so they celebrated the 7 days with joy. For Hezekiah, king of Judah, had contributed to the assembly 1,000 bulls and 7,000 sheep, and the princes had contributed to the assembly 1,000 bulls and 10,000 sheep, and a large number of priests consecrated themselves. All the assembly of Judah rejoiced, and the priests and the Levites and all the assembly that came from Israel, both the sojourners who came from the land of Israel and those living in Judah. So there was great joy in Jerusalem, because there was nothing like this in Jerusalem since the days of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel. Then the Levitical priests arose and blessed the people, and their voice was heard, and their prayer came to his holy dwelling place, to heaven.
Thank you, sweetie.
That's what I call revival.
Yeah, that's amazing. In fact, that particular moment, they did have revival. They celebrated the Feast of Unleavened Bread 2 weeks instead of just 1 week. Yeah, they were excited. And what did we read?
A lot.
Guys showed up that were unclean.
Right.
Guys showed up that did not prepare their bodies.
Guys from tribes from the northern kingdom.
That's right.
That had been scattered. So these were people who had been divorced from the land, i.e. they were scattered out of that land as a result of their disobedience.
Well, these particular guys, there were stages that was happening. So these particular guys were still in the northern areas, but the northern kingdom as a whole had been conquered by Assyria, and over a period of 20 to 25 years, they were scattered.
My point is...
these particular guys were still in the area, and they were still in rebellion, and this is why Hezekiah sends out a letter to them all the way from Dan to Beersheba, which is, north to south throughout the northern kingdom, saying, come back for Passover, which is a covenant action. Right. Which requires them to repent and actually come into covenant and keep this. But yet when they do, because they and their fathers and who knows how many generations had been in rebellion at this point, they didn't actually remember the rules for showing up. Right. Right.
My only point was that they weren't divorced from covenant. If they chose to repent and come back and keep covenant with him, they were absolutely able to do that.
That's right. Because Leviticus 26, by the way, the Father says that if they repent while they're being punished for their rebellion, he will not break covenant with them and he will take them back. Judges chapter 2, verses 1 through 4, he also says it again. In fact, there in Judges chapter 2, he says, I will never break covenant with you guys. Right. Even when you're in rebellion, even when you're scattered because of your rebellion, if you repent, he'll take them back. So the point of what we just read, though, in 2 Chronicles 30 was Passover is a covenant meal. It's a big deal, as we read in Jubilees 49. And what did we read in Jubilees 49? We read the circumstance of a guy who could come back. He was clean, but his heart was not there. Well, what we just read with Hezekiah was a bunch of men from the 10 tribes and different families. They did come back, but they didn't prepare their bodies properly. So their hearts were prepared, and Hezekiah even acknowledges that in his prayer, and he asks the Father to pardon them and anyone who prepared his heart but did not prepare his body according to the instructions. And then what happens? He says, and the Lord healed them. Right. What did he heal them of?
Good question.
So this is what we've been getting at, guys. We got guys coming, we got men, different families coming in the presence of the Lord, physically unclean, but their hearts are good. Yeah. They still needed healing. Yeah. From something. It doesn't specifically state. I would suggest that it's already given us plenty of understanding of what they were healed of. Yeah. But it doesn't specifically state it. And I think that that's fascinating. But they needed to be healed. That's the thing I want you to focus on, because something was wrong, basically. Right. And I love how it goes on to say, as they continue to celebrate, that the Levites, not the priests, but the Levite people from the tribe of Levi were commended because they did purify their bodies properly and do all the sanctification properly. And even the priests, if you read further up in the chapter and even in chapter 29, the priests did not, they didn't do it in time, right? This is why this whole celebration is happening on second Passover, on the backup clause, because they basically didn't do it in time for first Passover, and they were kind of ashamed of themselves. But the Levites of that area, that time, did do it right, which is why they were commended by Hezekiah for their diligence and what they did. So I just think it's fascinating, because you've got the guys, the priests, who were supposed to be doing this, failing, and then you've got other tribes that were still coming out of rebellion, coming back with repentance, back to keeping the law of God, failing, and yet they still show up to celebrate Passover, right? They still show up. And this actually even tells us further on up in the chapter that the guys who came back and did not prepare themselves and their bodies properly to be clean, they couldn't even slaughter their own Passover lambs. Right. The priests had to do it for them. And that was why you read that part there. So it's fascinating to see in a broad scope, like a lot of these people trying to celebrate Passover are doing it wrong. Right. But the Father blessed them anyway. Yeah. Healed people, right, physically, and then was happy with their celebration, and they rejoiced in the Lord. even 7 days longer than they normally would for this festival, right? And it's just an amazing concept of the Father wants your heart. He knows you're going to mess up. This is the point of his law. It's all graciously provided to you so that you can walk in the right path even when you mess up, and you can get back on it. It is the grace of God. The law of God is the grace of God. Yeah. It's amazing. And people just have so twisted that idea, and it just breaks my heart. It really does. So,
so anyone who, wants us to do some sort of a teaching on which right calendar you need to keep, don't look for that anytime soon, because this is one of the reasons we don't sweat on that too much. Because we know we're not going to know the exact calendar until he comes back and resets it all for us anyways. And what matters is you guys are wanting to keep these things. So go on whatever calendar you feel fits the scriptures best, and that's fine. Yeah. And we all love each other and love Yeshua anyways, and he loves us, and he honors the fact that our hearts desire to obey, and we're trying to do that the best we can with our individual understandings.
Yeah. He just wants your heart, guys. He doesn't, this is it's so important. And so even people that had all the law available to them, right? They didn't have the calendar lost yet. Right. They had all the right days available. They had all the instructions. They had priests actively learning it and teaching it, or supposed to be. And you know what I'm saying? Like, even in the height of the nation of Israel and everything that's going on, they still were doing things wrong. Right. And the Father was still being gracious to them and forgiving them and healing them and letting them celebrate and joy and festival to him, right? When this feast that's called the Feast of the Lord and Jubilees. So I think it's fascinating, just as a great example for us. It's a wonderful testimony. Our last pairing that we want to look at real quick is that of Zechariah 14. It's just 3 quick verses, 12 through 15. So in verse 12 it says, "Now this will be the plague with which the Lord will strike all the peoples who have gone to war against Jerusalem. Their flesh will rot while they stand on their feet. Their eyes will rot in their sockets. Their tongue will rot in their mouth. It will come about in that day that a great panic from the Lord will fall on them, and they will seize one another's hand, and the hand of one another will be lifted up against another. Judah will also fight at Jerusalem, and the wealth of all the surrounding nations will be gathered, gold and silver and garments in great abundance. So also like this plague will be the plague on the horse and the mule and the camel and the donkey and all the cattle that will be in those camps." Okay. So we just wanted to, this was more of a severe example of what we're talking about, right? We got Yeshua returning, and he's destroying the wicked one with the brightness of his coming, but there's a lot of collateral damage. There's all these armies that have gathered from Revelation 16 through 19 from the 10 kings and the armies of the world that come together to fight him in his return, and they come up against Jerusalem at this moment because that's where he's coming down. Right. So that's why they assemble there. But you've got this concept that when he comes down with his angels, Matthew 25:31, his holy ones, Joel 2, they're all coming down and to have to literally fight people that are trying to fight them. And in this moment, they're like, disintegrating while they stand. It's not even really a fight, to be honest. It's just, what does it say? Their flesh rots while they stand on their feet. Their eyes will rot in their sockets. The tongue will rot in their mouth. This is them getting the full-on wrath of God, right? Yeah. So holiness interacting with complete unrighteousness and wickedness, and they can't even, they die quicker than they can fall. Yeah. So this is how, like I was saying earlier, you will not win this physics battle or whatever this is, right? Yeah. Between our corrupted flesh and holy set apartness of God's power. He wins every time, which is why he's given us in Leviticus 14 and 15 these safeguards of cleanliness, and even with the dietary instructions, Leviticus 11, all these concepts that seem mundane and may seem antiquated and may seem like they don't apply to us. But the whole thing is so we can understand how to interact with the Father, and not have to worry about the inward or the outward mark of leprosy. And it's just such a fundamental concept that he understands where we are in our corruptedness, but we don't understand just how holy he is, and how set apart and righteous and pure he is. And so we ignorantly and arrogantly sometimes try to come before him, and this is where we will lose that interaction in a bad way, and he doesn't want that to happen. He wants you to be around him, right? This is why in the very beginning, everything he called good was a house with a man and a woman in his presence. Right. He wants to be around you. That was the original intent and plan. And the whole point of the Bible is to get us back to good, right? Back to that garden-like state where we can exist in his presence in his house and be full of joy. and it actually makes him happy too.
Right.
So this is the beauty of our Heavenly Father, who is love, and this is what we hope to show from the scriptures, even scriptures that some people think are boring. We don't. We love Leviticus, but we hope to be able to show this from the scriptures, and we hope it's encouraged you. Sweetie, do you have any concluding remarks before we end this week?
Same as always.
Yeah.
If you watched through to the end of the video, thank you for watching the whole thing. We appreciate your studious hearts. And as always, just to remind people, we're not in this for the likes and the clicks and the popularity and the subscriber counts. We really, truly just have a heart to help other people comprehend the word in such a way that they can go and help other people comprehend the word, so on and so forth. We want to really be able to help people actually know how to make disciples. And the first step is comprehending the word. So you just got to start by keeping everything in context. As we say here, context creates comprehension. And that's really our only goal, is just to help other people be able to understand this book, so that they're always ready with an answer. And if they're ever reading the book and come into something that they may not understand right away, the more you have these core contextual concepts in your mind, the easier it becomes when you run into verses like that. So we just appreciate you guys. Come join us on Facebook if you like the online fellowship. Thanks to everyone who's shown us support. And as always, we appreciate your prayers and your encouragement. So we just really appreciate you guys.
Thank you. Well said, sweetie. We do appreciate you, and we hope that you are here next week as we continue this amazing journey through the book of Leviticus and gain so much more insight to our Father and how we will exist in his house in the future after the resurrection. So thank you for joining us, and we hope that we'll see you next week.
Bye, guys. Have
Shabbat
a good
shalom.
week.